Was there a conflict of interest in your giving paid speeches into the run-up of your announcement that you're running for president?
The answer to the second is no. And the answer to the first is I have said repeatedly, I want those emails out. Nobody has a bigger interest in getting them released than I do. I respect the State Department. They have their process that they do for everybody, not just for me. But anything that they might do to expedite that process, I heartily support. You know, I want the American people to learn as much as we can about the work that I did with our diplomats and our development experts, because I think it will show how hard we worked and what we did for our country during the time that I was Secretary of State.
Yes, folks, that is not an illusion. That is not even a robot. That is actually Hillary Clinton, although when you watch her listen to the question where she nodded and rolled her head and stared with her right, you might think it was a robot, a malfunctioning robot, but no, it was Hillary Clinton. She actually took some questions today, nothing earth-shattering. Here's what happened today. Earlier today, the State Department said, we're going to release Hillary's 55,000 pages of emails next year. And then a court weighed in immediately and said, oh, no, you don't. You're going to look at them, and as you go along, you're going to release them. And that schedule will be put out next week, according to the court. Hillary then was asked about it. You heard her. I want those emails out now. Of course she does. These are the 55,000 pages that her and Uma and the crew all sat down and said, we can hand these in, and then erased everything else. We want to see what was erased. We want to see what was not handed in. I couldn't care less about the 55,000 pages that were handed in because Hillary said here. So, of course she wants us to see them. There's nothing there. Now, having said all that, we find out about New York Times' big story about Sidney Blumenthal. You talk about a blast from the past. Sidney Blumenthal emailing Hillary, had her private email. Oh, by the way, Hillary now used 2 emails, it turns out. When she told her, she used 1. And Sidney Blumenthal was emailing her about Benghazi and policy in Libya. I mean, what the heck is going on here? We'll never know. We'll never know. And if the foolish American public elects her and the biased American media allows it to happen, or vice versa, I guess we get what we deserve. I guess we get what we deserve. Dr. Alan Keyes is coming up, folks, and we're going to talk to him about all of this and about the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, which is due to be reauthorized by the end of this month. It's all straight ahead. But here's a little more Hillary, because I know you didn't get enough.
Look, I know that there have been a lot of questions about Iraq posed to candidates over the last weeks. I've made it very clear that I made a mistake, plain and simple. And I have written about it in my book. I've talked about it in the past. And, what we now see is a very different and very dangerous situation. The United States is doing what it can, but ultimately this has to be a struggle that the Iraqi government and the Iraqi people are determined to win for themselves.
All right, and as we know, folks, that isn't going too well, is it? Joining us now is Dr. Alan Keyes, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, and, of course, former Republican presidential candidate, and loyalty to liberty.com is where you could find him. And, Doctor, welcome back, sir.
Glad to be with you. Thank you.
All right. So here's Hillary finally answering some questions from the media, 7 of them, I think, for the first time in 30 days. We just lost Ramadi. The Iraqi troops continue to run. ISIS is marching through the streets, waving the flag. They've taken over Ramadi. They're 70 miles or so from Baghdad. And her answer is, it's up to the Iraqis. Well, that isn't working.
Well, it's especially not working in light of the fact that the United States helped to create this awful situation. And I don't just mean with the intervention that led to the overthrow of the government there and so forth and so on. I also mean with what appears to have been aid to the anti-Syrian rebels that then strengthened the hand of ISIS, giving them access possibly to weapons that were either of our provender or from our then partners in Saudi Arabia, so that they were equipped to grow in power and in brutality as they have done. And I think that we're again seeing the evidence that people who talk facilely, and I mean on all sides of the equation, I don't care if it's Rand Paul or Obama or anybody else, talking glibly in ways that suggest we can just retreat from the world, that everything's going to be all right, don't appear to have learned the lessons of the 20th century. think that it's possible for one of the major countries, if not still the major country on the face of the earth, to abdicate moral and actual leadership on behalf of saying, well, let them stew in their own juice, it's up to them now, no matter how much our failure of leadership and failure to cooperate with others and failure to try to enunciate what ought to be the right approach to these threats to international order, I think our failure has to be factored into this. And it's a sign, to tell you the truth, that we're now dealing with a generation of leaders who are not up to the job. In the past, we had Americans who had greater common sense, maybe fewer credentials, certainly less ties to big money, but they seem to get the job done a heck of a lot better than these people.
And let me ask you, if this situation were reversed, if these were Muslims who were being slaughtered and raped and taken into slavery, etc., by I don't know, Christian militias or whatever, do you think the reaction of this president, this administration would be different?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I think that we have clearly seen what you could call a tilt toward a lot of these more radical Islamist types out of this administration. But I am not sure whether or not we're dealing here with that kind of a bias in favor of those who are declared and vengeful enemies of the United States, or whether we are at some level just dealing with a failure to appreciate geopolitical reality.
Right.
Either way, it's really hard to get a good result out of that kind of combination of incompetence and bias.
You mentioned Rand Paul. He's going to supposedly filibuster the Patriot Act being renewed. What's your take on that whole, the Patriot Act, the NSA, and the fact that they sunset at the end of the month?
Well, all I can say is that I wish that Rand Paul were as strong when he speaks about what ought to be our role in defense of the great values that this country represents, as he is in trying to defend against the militarization and against the advent of the police state in this country, because I think that that's a stand that's well worth taking. And the idea that has become current over the last several years in the mouths of many people, Republicans, Democrats, I don't care who they are, telling us that we must sacrifice our liberty in order that we shall have security. That's, again, an example of the deep incompetence of this generation. Do they think that American leaders didn't face that choice in the past? Do they think that we got here as a free country because they were willing to take the easy way out and destroy the liberties of the American people on the pretense that they were keeping them safe? Liberty and the Constitution that provides it is supposed to be what these people are sworn to uphold. Not to stand by and say, whoops, for the sake of security, we've got to let it go.
So, yeah, very, very well said. Let me ask you finally about, get back to the Clintons if we can for a second. You know that I don't even know where to start. Now we find out that Hillary used a second email address. We find out about the huge amounts of money that the Clintons got from making speeches. We find out about the fact that the State Department said they would hand over the emails, the 55,000 pages next year, but today a court said, no, you have to do it as you review them. But Alan, there's nothing in those 55,000 pages that we need to see or care about because she picked them. She handed those over. It's the one she didn't hand over. We find out Sidney Blumenthal now was in contact with her regarding Benghazi policy. I mean, wow.
Well, see, I think, sadly, that unless you're really willing to get serious, and serious in the case of trying to get information out of the executive branch that they don't want to give you, means that you have to basically put them under the threat of impeachment, because impeachment suspends all their ability to resist. They cannot resist the authority of Congress in cases of impeachment because the president has no implicit pardoning power. He can't tell people to go off and do things that actually are in violation of the law and expect to be able to protect them. And so I think that this is a clear sign that because the Republican Congress didn't have the guts to say, if you don't do what's necessary, we will take the constitutional means to force you to be accountable. A lot of these people are now hiding behind an executive privilege that shouldn't exist in this case.
So you think the failure to go after Obama on so many issues constitutionally in the Congress has emboldened, for instance, Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think so. I mean, I've read the Federalist Papers a lot over the course of my career. One of the things they made plain is that it's going to be difficult to control the executive, and they repeatedly say that's why we gave the Congress the power of impeachment.
You. Doctor, great to talk to you, sir. We'll do it again. Alan Keyes, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch is next.